Your voice.
Voice.
Hello, everyone. Sorry again. Welcome to UMD Media. UMD Media is live on YouTube and Facebook. The weekly H panel starts now. Please subscribe, share, like, so that many can follow our show. Great. It's my great pleasure once again to have the panel, the full house today. And we'll be talking about appraising Tigray's call or ask is the topic for today. But we will start as usual with the first question of what stood out for you guys. And let's start today with Professor Scale.
Thank you. Thank you. What stood out for me is basically the continuing replacement of statecraft by drama in the country. It has now reached its crescendo this week. Let me try to explain what I mean by that this drama reached its crescendo. The Tigray war, when the government of Ethiopia felt like they had won the war against Tigray. Victory was celebrated in the country with the military parade, with aircraft crisscrossing the skies of Addis Ababa and all kinds of military paraphernalia on display. Never mind that this was not like a war against another country. Never mind that this was simply a war that was not finished. Never mind the fact that it was the Tigray forces that withdrew from their positions for political reasons. That was followed by the announcement of a national dialogue, as if now everything is placid and the country, a national dialogue was announced. It was quickly taken up by the parliament, and commissioners are about to be appointed. Never mind that this was it's not really national, or it's not about dialogue. It was simply make-believe to respond to the criticisms from Western donors on whom Ethiopia has depended since its inception in the first place, and now it depends almost 40 to 50% of its budget coming from the West. That was followed by a release of political prisoners. And this was welcomed by everybody, welcomed by the West and the United Nations and everybody else. It was welcome. The welcome avalanche of welcome was sent to Addis Ababa. And they started to bask in the glow of releasing political prisoners. Never mind that thousands of political prisoners remain. Never mind that leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front remain in custody. But there is this parade, the drama of releasing political prisoners. And then, surprisingly, it seems to have worked. The drama seems to have worked. The world responded. President Biden, for the first time, spoke to him and congratulated him on, or commended him on the release of political prisoners. The UK minister is announcing some badly needed support in Ethiopia. The UN chief commending the Ethiopians on the national dialogue, the Ethiopia-led national dialogue, and expressing that his admiration of the Ethiopian Prime Minister, perhaps mesmerized by what he calls the unifying vision of the Ethiopian Prime Minister, which transcends ethnic boundaries and other parochial boundaries. That the UN chief is committed to Abiy Ahmed no matter what, that what the Ethiopian Prime Minister is doing right now was the very reason for which the United Nations was established right after World War II, so that we would not have a war in which genocide would be committed. Never mind about that. So it seems to have worked. The world is responding. And now, once again, the Ethiopian Prime Minister is their man in Addis Ababa. A moderate, they call him, a moderate that is simply misguided by Amhara expansionist or fascist and the Eritrean dictator. This is just amazing that the crescendo is the drama ended yesterday. The drama that this is a peacemaker, this is a triumphant African general. Never mind that this is not the case, but this ended yesterday when the deputy chief of staff of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces came out and declared, in a way that seems to be contrary to the policy of the Prime Minister, where he said that they would not enter Tigray. The Deputy Foreign Minister comes out and says, contrary to what the Prime Minister says, that they will enter Tigray, that they will liberate Tigray, that Mekelle and Tigray is part of Ethiopia. They're going to get in and do what they had done before, not only Tigray, but everywhere else. He said that 21st century, everywhere else, opposition is not going to be allowed. So my point is that, yeah, the world is responding. And yesterday, the Ethiopian general who was made general for winning this neo-Pan-Africanist war declared that the drama has ended. They're going to go back to war. That is what stood out for me yesterday for me.
Very important. I think that we should show that video, very short video, where that general talks about that.
ትግራይ ክልል ዘልቆ መግባት ያልቻለው ለምንድን ነው የቆምነው የሚለው በጣም ጥሩ ጥያቄ ነው። አሁን እንደ አተረጓጎም ሊሆን ይችላል፣ ግን ትክክለኛው ነገር ምንድነው? ለምን ቆምን የሚለው ለምሳሌ ሲገለጽ ምዕራፍ 1ን ጨርሰናል ነው የሚለው። ስለዚህ ምዕራፍ 1ን ጨርሰናል ማለት ቃል በቃል ምዕራፍ 2 አለ ማለት ነው። መቀሌ ግን እና ትግራይ ግን የኢትዮጵያ ግዛት ነው። ማንም እኛን አያቆመንም። እንገባለን፣ ጠላት እናጠፋለን። ይሄ ምንም የሚያሻማ ነገር የለም። የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብም እንዳለቀ አርጓልም ራሱ መውሰድ ያለበት አላለቀም። በዚህ አውራማ ሸኔ ነኝ፣ በዚህ እንደዚህ ቅማንት ነኝ፣ በዚህ ምናምን ነኝ የሚባል ነገር አይሰራም ከዚህ በኋላ። የጊዜ ጉዳይ ነው። አንድ ትልቅ ጉዳይ ስላለን ጥላ ስላለን ነው። ይሄ የጊዜ ጉዳይ ነው። መጥፋት አለበት። መጥፋት ማለት ምን ማለት ነው? ይሄ ትጥቅ አንስቶ በሀገር ውስጥ መዋጋት የአንደኛው ክፍለ ዘመን ስለ
So it's basically he's making a call to the Ethiopian people, to everyone, like Professor Esquiel said, for our audience. No question about eliminating, decimating the enemy. That's his word, verbatim. Faisal, what stood out for you?
Well, I think this is this new development is something that's startling to many. But in my own unique way, I'm not really surprised. I'm not surprised in the sense that the United Nations is an entity that's established for the status quo. So as long as Abiy shows some sort of rhetoric around what they have been telling, the UN would be very happy to commend him and to jump on. He's not the first one that they did for that. He will not be the last one. This is an entity known for watching massacres happening throughout the world, not only in Ethiopia, particularly Tigray and Eritrea, Oromo, but other parts of Ethiopia in the past, such as the Somali region and elsewhere. So I'm not that much surprised. Neither am I surprised at the American position softening towards Abiy for two reasons. Number one, the US diplomacy at this point in time is weak throughout the world, particularly in conflict and hotspots, whether that is in Crimea and Russia area, or whether that is in Afghanistan, or even Ethiopia. So basically, Biden, who is in the eyes of many a low energy president at this particular time, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, any way and in any means that they can put a cold blanket on the what you call recalcitrant position that Abiy has been taking towards the United States, and literally showing defiance at a situation where the U.S. hands were tied and they couldn't use both their diplomatic power as well as their military power. For instance, to establish a no-fly zone in order to protect the Tigrayan civilians. This is something that one can expect from the U.S. It's also an indication, in my opinion, that the U.S. succumbed to the Ethiopian government financing no more movement. There are legal issues that are emerging from many circles that the Ethiopian government was funding and sending and giving money to US and American activists, and that's illegal in the American law system. So in the short term, the US government has succumbed to many pressures that come from multiple places, such as the AU and African states. What's really surprising, and I share this with Scale, is for the US and the UN to so early and so soon shower praises on somebody whose status and position vis-a-vis genocide has yet to be determined by the US State Department itself. So that premature jump on the wagon is a little bit surprising, but for the US to switch sides and play games with the lives of people, I'm not that much surprised. Just one other issue that I will probably come back. Another thing that really stood for me within the context of larger horn is the fact that the Ogaden National Liberation Front released a press release yesterday in their time to basically spell out the type of dialogue and negotiation they want with the federal government. Yes.
Can I play that and then you can speak to that so that
or I can come back. I can come back to that.
Okay.
I can stop here. Yeah.
No, I wanted to play that so you can speak to that.
guddiga fulinta jabhadda wadaniga xoreynta ogaadeen iyo shirkiisii caadiga isugu yimid jigjiga 17 ilaa 20 January 2020 shirka guddiga fulinta jawxo oo ka qabsoomay magaalada jigjiga socdayna 17 ilaa 20 Janaayo 2022 ayaa lagaga dooday xaaladda siyaasadeed ee deegaanka Soomaalida Ethiopia iyo midda Geeska Afrika iyo sidoo kale qodobo khuseeya horumarinta hawlaha ururka.
Maybe you can speak now.
Yes, so this came on the heels of an earlier information that Mustafa Umar faked and released through the Ethiopian Amharic-speaking YouTube media, where he said they reached an agreement. With that, I think ONLF came and said there was no agreement, there was a simple talk, then followed by this executive committee's meeting that basically set out the terms under which they can only participate in the upcoming dialogue. And they basically spoke to the issues that Scale really covered in general, that these talks should be free from the government's manipulation, that people and different parties, both opposition and non-opposition, should be allowed to collectively and in cooperation address and draft the agenda, that it's not only a conference or talks that would be spearheaded by the government side. They basically said if PP wants to have its delegation from all over its chapters, that's fine. But Gurubis who are in the opposition camp or even in the civic society, such as on ONLF and others, will also bring their representatives free from the PP hand. And therefore, that's the only condition in which they can participate. They underlined the historical struggles that they have waged for many years, and they reminded everybody that that struggle and the cause for what they have struggled is still on the books, and they will make sure that they seek those goals, which were to secure and protect the interests of the Somali people. They put a lot of really rich Somali language in the press, where they talked about the fact that you may see the ashes of the struggle today, but the fire burning underneath is still alive. So it was a very strong, well-crafted, well thought out press release that really gives Abiy and his team a point to ponder, including how they would go ahead and structure with when it comes to this conference, so that they will not take something that's already pre-cooked in Addis Ababa and hand down, as we are hearing from the PP side.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. Yusuf, how was your week? What stood out for you? Let me just, I think you're muted. Yeah.
The theatrics on one hand and the reaction of the West on the other hand has been going on from day one throughout this war. And the worst offender on this scale has been the United Nations chief himself. You would think that he would measure the progress that's going on in this crisis by how much the humanitarian crisis in Tigray has been alleviated. That should have been its primary scale. Nevertheless, he always responds to side issues or to some kind of theatrics from the Abiy government, and he always keeps humanizing Abiy. And that is exactly what we have been seeing the last week. But since both Hizkiel and Faisal have been talking about this eloquently, I'm not going to add anything on it. Instead, I will mention one side issue that has thrown light to the sad state of our region, and at the same time, on the preparations of war that has been going on in this crisis. That was the case of the Somali. The case of the Somali troops has been mentioned in the Globe and Mail. And to me, there were two insights because I was caught off surprise by that report. And to me, there were two things that indicated. One, the first one was that the preparations of this war have been go all the way back. Even the TPLF has gotten it wrong. The TPLF always mentions the elections as being the event that triggered the war. But I've always been claiming that it goes even way back before that. That the elections had been the excuse that they wanted. Had it not been the elections, it would have been another thing. But the war would have continued. Now, in this case, regardless of the Somali case, there is this interesting phenomena. I believe that when they sent 10,000 Somalis to be trained in Eritrea, that was not all that they wanted, they meant to do, even as they sent them. They were sending them as a part, not only to train them, but as a preparations for war. The reason why they sent this 10,000 instead of 10,000 troops from Somalia is obvious. Had it been, for example, had Somalia sent 10,000 troops to Ethiopia, which was its share of the war, everybody would have wondered, because Somalia is a vulnerable nation. It depends for its safety, even for its safety from Al-Shabaab, by military forces from the neighboring countries. So everyone would have suspected that something wrong is going on if Somalia had sent 10,000 troops to Eritrea. Instead, they created this clever ploy. What they did was they sent 10,000 persons to be trained, but all along they were thinking of using those 10,000 troops in the war. So that tells us that the preparations for the war goes all the way back. In fact, I believe it was in the Somali case, in the Globe and Mail case, it mentions Gabriel Meskel Kasa, the guy, the chief of staff that was the interim of Tigray administration that has been, we usually see him in many media outlets nowadays. He said that, let me quote him, all of us who were top officials had knowledge of that. It means of the Somali troops. He told the Globe, the Somali troops took training in Eritrean camp of Sawa as a result of a military deal between three governments before the war started. And then the Globe also adds that after this agreement goes all the way back to 2018, just after PM Abiy came to power in Ethiopia. That is the one thing that the first thing that I noticed. The second part is we all sympathized. I remember when the news was heard that the Somali trainees were being used inside Tigray. Somehow there was some kind of sympathy towards the Somali troops because people believed that they were forced to enter into the war, and they were forced, but yet they turned out to be among the most brutal in the war. The villagers said that they killed hundreds of them, that they beheaded many of them in the style of ISIS, and then also they were also keen in destroying churches and killing priests. That caught me off surprise, and I said there could only be two reasons for this. One is probably, I thought, maybe that all the enmity, between Habesha and the Somali, did it show up in this case? Because if they are Habesha, you wouldn't give a damn if they are Amhara or Tigrayans. So is that what happened? And the second thing that came to my mind was, especially, remember at that time, people were wondering, why is it that so many priests are being killed? Why do they focus on the churches? And part of the answer, not all the answer, part of the answer we also find it in this report, where it says that people were afraid to go to the church because the Somali troops were killing all the people that were congregating in the churches. So to me, that was sad because it tells us that the Amharas have no monopoly in this epidemic of hate that is haunting our region, because you could see it in Afar, you could see it in some other groups, you could see it among the Somalis. So that gave me, it depressed me. To put it simply, in simple words, it really depressed me. So that was one of what I noted, or other side issue of this, on all this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Yosef. Maybe Faisal, you want to add, or?
Yeah, I like to add, and I think I'm sorry to jump in, and Scale will probably pick on this one. I will be very brief. I think so far we have seen one report by Lucy Casa, so probably we need corroboration of this story before we really go into a very serious conclusion. Probably we would like to see more reports and abundance of evidence on this issue, but it's a depressing report. I agree with Yosef on that one. I would also add that if Somalis were in the Tigray theater under the auspices of Eritrea, was there some sort of supervision by Eritrean generals and Eritrean colonels? Because most of the Somalis sent there were low-level soldiers who were not even taking orders from their colonels and generals in Somalia. They were completely being ordered around by Eritrean generals who engaged them in the theater. Having said that, I think there is a serious movement in Somalia at this point in time to put this in the doorsteps of President Formaggio at many levels. Number one, no Somali wants to be associated with this kind of killing and massacre when they themselves have had always, as Joseph touched, decried about massacres against by Ethiopian troops, whether it was EPRDF, TPLF, or prior to that, Derg. So the history that they had, which was the history of massacre, now for them to own that is a serious matter. So a lot of Somali intellectuals, including one former regional president, Mohamed Ware, who tweeted today, wants Farmacho to account for what happened and to bring him to the Somali parliament, and including to face issues of treason, because he did this and he sent Somali troops into the theater without the constitutional approval that he has. Having said that, there is a talk that Abiy is already indicating to dump Farmacho, and already very high level Somali sources are telling me that one of the reasons why he invited the Somaliland President Musa Bihi, and also very soon he will be inviting two other regional presidents, that of Puntland and Jubaland, are indications, I was told by a vice regional president of one of the regions, that there is evidence coming from Addis Ababa that Abiy would be dumping Farmacho. And it could be what Joseph is talking about, that he wants to distance himself from this new emerging massacre in the hands of the Somali troops, which belongs to Farmacho. Thank you.
Great. I think that is a good segue into the topic of the day, distancing himself. So, is it the reading and the understanding of the panel that what President Debretsion of Tigray wrote this week? Let me just share that, where he talks about to achieve peace, take Eritrea out of the game. So we discussed that, we covered that in our previous panel as well, where Eritrea is standing, the Bahar Dar Asmara axis, all that. So what is your reading of Debretion's message in this, Professor Asgal? You are, I think, muted. Yeah. Okay.
I think Dr. Debretsion is spot on. I think the problem in Ethiopia, on one level, with regard to ending the war, is Isaias. Isaias never wanted Ethiopia to be at peace. Some of my friends who were in the early 90s in Asmara, they were telling me that Eritrean generals and Eritrean politicians who are working with them have always told them that they do not want to see Ethiopia at peace with itself. That's the only way that they would be able to ensure continued Eritrean independence. And that's true because as early as 1976, Isaias had made a decision that Eritrea would not be independent if the war is not taken to Addis Ababa. Right after they almost liberated Asmara, but then the Ethiopian army came back and pushed them back to Nakfa. The decision was made that Eritrea's independence, or Eritrea's prosperity after independence, is dependent on weak Ethiopia. And this is what really surprises me, that Ethiopians do not understand this, that this is not clear to them, that Eritrea is the Eritrean president, not Eritrea in general, but the Eritrean president is the one that started the war in 1998, that claimed the lives of about 100,000 people. Why the power in Ethiopia, any kind of power that you want to sustain yourself or ensconce yourself in, should be dependent on Asmara? I just can't begin to fathom that even the Amhara elite think that Eritrea is the Eritrean dictator is their man, that he would be supporting them, and then they would probably save in the Amhara region. I don't understand why Ethiopians in general think that the Eritrean president is their friend. The example of Eritrea in the Horn of Africa is the worst example that you would want to take if you are a country that aspires to become democratic and prosperous. What has happened in Eritrea since independence? What is it that he brought to Eritrea since independence that anyone in Ethiopia or elsewhere wants to emulate? He's been in power for 30 years. So people who were born like 29 years ago do not know any other leader in Eritrea. And what were they watching? What were they seeing? That Eritrea is a country that with no legislature, and he mocks having a legislature, except Eritrea doesn't have a political competition. There is no independent civil society. There is no independent judiciary in Eritrea. There is no media outlets that are independent. Everyone knows that. This is not a record that you could emulate. This is not a person that you would want to be friends with. Young people in Eritrea for the last 30 years have been passing through military service, at the end of which they become assigned to the government or continue to serve in the military, but act or serve as forced laborers in private and public works in Eritrea. And because of that, Eritrea has lost its youth. Some estimates say up to 15% of Eritrean youth have left Eritrea. This is the record for Eritrea. This is the record that you want to emulate. It's only Abiy Ahmed, even after 3 years of working with Eritrea and turning his own country into ashes because of the war that he instigated, because of the war that he commanded, because of the war that he was the architecture of. Even Abiy himself almost lost his power, the thing that he lives for, but still maintains any relationship with Eritrea. It is surprising to me that Ethiopians actually look at Eritrea and seek their support against their fellow citizens in Tigray. All the more it surprises me that the world, who awarded Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize and got a heartburn for that, they still see that Eritrea is meddling in Ethiopian politics. He says that on television. He declares that he cares about Ethiopia and is going to meddle in Ethiopian politics against any norms, international norms. While they're seeing this, and that it is Abiy Ahmed, it's not the Eritrean guy that went to Addis Ababa. It is Abiy Ahmed that went to Asmara saying that he was going to seek peace, and then allowed the Eritrean military into Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia to decimate the country. And still, the world still sees that Abiy Ahmed is still their man. It is absolutely surprising to me that anyone really sees that this friendship in the Horn of Africa is a stabilizing factor. Well, I'm glad that for Majo, one of the legs of the stool, the three legs stool, is collapsing in Somalia. And when Abiy is trying to befriend himself with the Somaliland or Jubaland or Puntland, I hope that those leaders in Somaliland, in Jubaland, and in Puntland, I hope that they see the record of Abiy Ahmed and distance themselves from Abiy Ahmed and his comrade in Addis Ababa. So in general, the president of Tigray was spot on. He's right. As long as Eritrea is meddling in Ethiopian politics and calling the shots, there cannot be any peace in Ethiopia and no peace in the Horn of Africa in general. He is the destabilizing agent in the Horn of Africa. This should have been clear to everybody, not just President Debretsion, to everybody, internationally, regionally, everywhere. But sadly, he's still a player.
Thank you. In the benefit of our viewers, we are talking about Appraising Tigray's Call or Tigray's Ask. This is an article written by the president of Tigray, Debretsion Gebremichael, published by the Africa Report yesterday, January the 20th. Faisal, let's hear your take on this. What's your reading of what Debretsion is looking for from the international community or from those who are advocating for peace?
Yes, I think Depression is in a rock and hard place in the sense that, on the one hand, he sees his people dying on a daily basis by the drone and fixed wings planes and now helicopters in some parts. Kids dying, medication not coming to his area, famine hitting people that have really seen, if you will, one of the worst 2 years. So he sees that. He also sees that the naive position of the world, particularly the West, vis-a-vis Abiy and the rest of Ethiopia. And unfortunately, the world sees Ethiopia in a way that you and I don't see. They see Ethiopia as the stabilizing country in the Horn of Africa. But when you are a Somali like myself, you see Ethiopia really as the cancer of, when it comes to politics and other people politics in the Horn of Africa. Because if Ethiopia was fixed in a democratic way, we can argue that most of the Horn of Africa people could live peacefully together. With that historical background, now you have the added factor of Isaias since 1994, as Kyle said, who those of us who are of certain age, we know that the bottom line for Isaias and his entourage was to live through a period when they can destabilize Ethiopia. That doesn't mean I'm very much pushing for the Ethiopian case vis-a-vis Eritrea, but this is the reality that Isaias and EPLF came to the throne of power. Having said that, I think I don't understand why Debretsion and his team pay much attention to what the West says, simply because the West has witnessed, in my opinion, a genocide that is almost proportionally getting closer to what had happened in Rwanda at a time when the world had the knowledge of the Rwanda previously. Now that genocide that we started in Tigray is now also coming in a very steady way to Oromia region. I mean, reports are telling us that the way the war is being engaged in Oromia, it's literally wiping out villages if there is any suspicion that they see, whereas in Tigray, now at least it's the drone. Coming to Debretsion's issue, I don't see any reason why Debretsion should really sort of alter or slow down whatever military political strategy they have with the intent that he may woo the West to his side. I don't think that would happen. I don't think the West would choose and protect the interests of Tigray people because, as we always say, the West is known historically for siding with the more powerful, the status quo. So I would urge, as Debretsion already said, that to make his negotiations with Abiy, several preconditions, one of which is for Eritrea completely to get out before talks start. And number two, to make a line to say that dialogue will not happen with Tigray, no matter what happens to TDF, TPLF, or Tigrayans, as long as there is a single drone coming to their territory. And now we have the military guy literally boasting and saying that they will go back to. So some could be rhetoric, but drone coming to your house and to your children's playground and to your hospital, that's not diplomacy. That's not really like rhetoric. What the army guy was saying, I could see a lot of rhetoric in that Ethiopia is one country, Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Those are rhetoric and they may lead to a dangerous game. But drone is coming every day to your houses. That's beyond rhetoric. So I think in addition to making the red line the factor of science, they should also make the red line for any negotiation from here on. The issue of drone is continued and they block it. Those should come forefront and stick with those two issues.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. Yosef, you know closer to this issue. So, what is your take of the reading?
Uh, well, the most important statement in that article is any possibility of ending the war through negotiated settlement goes directly through Asmara. That was his. It almost says it all. Now, the question that I have is, for example, he also says that there is this, to use his phrase, this delusional grandeur to be a regional heavyweight, or as some call it, powerhouse. Now, think about this. Eritrea has neither the population base, let's say 3 million versus Ethiopia 120 million, nor the economic base. For example, UAE is a small nation, but it's an extremely rich country to be a powerhouse in that region. The only reason that it has a political clout at this moment is precisely because of its link with the Amharas. Of course, it has a huge army, which it has attained by killing the very nation itself, by killing the very nation of Eritrea itself, as Professor Hiskiel has been noting. But that force has been there for about 20 years, and and it didn't do anything until what? Until that link between Eritrea and the Amhara. That is the most important link that has to be broken. If indeed, I'm looking from the inside part. From the inside part, if one is to have a sustainable peace in that region, if one is to have a possibility of a meaningful, peaceful peace process, then that link between the Amhara and Eritrea has to be broken, because that is where Isaias gets all his power now. Because if he wants to meddle inside Ethiopia, he meddles through the Amharas. And the Amharas, if they are going to threat Abiy or anybody else, then it's because they have the backing of Eritrea. Now, I think Debretsion has made a clear case of this one, but to me the problem that comes is he never says how to stop that one. He only mentions that the West has to take robust actions. Okay. Think about the US, for example. Probably it's the US is his main audience in this case. Think about the US. The US has, when it comes to Eritrea, it has only made a very useless symbolic gestures, like sanctioning individuals like Philippos, Abraha Kasa, and Hagos Kisha. All of these are don't have a penny outside of Eritrea, and it wouldn't matter to them if they never get out of Eritrea for the rest of their lifetime. It has also sanctioned entities, but those entities has no dealings or any kind of business with the United States of America, so it remains vacuous. Instead of making these symbolic gestures, the US could focus on sanctions that really bite. For example, in Eritrea, if you intend sanctions that really, you have to target first the mining companies that are, the gold, the copper, and now potash. This is exactly where Eritrea, if you want really to sanction Eritrea to behave, for Eritrea to behave, then you have to sanction the mining companies. But the West is not doing that precisely because all of these companies, most of these companies come from the West, Canada, Australia, and others. The second thing is the arms embargo that the UN has lifted. Now, if they impose an arms embargo, that would also be a meaningful sanction. Okay, now that's one. But at the same time, what Debrecen hasn't mentioned was what has to be made from the inside part. What does the TPLF has to do on its own, to make this thing possible? I remember, when General Tzadkan talked about why did they go all the way to Addis Ababa. He said that it was then the shortest path. I can understand why he meant that, because once he deposed the government, then you could do all those things. The humanitarian crisis will end, the political crisis will end. But in retrospect, it has been shown that it was not the shortest path. The shortest path has always been Asmara, which is 100 kilometers from the borders of Eritrea. Now, another shortest path is, of course, the border to the Sudan. If you take these two routes, the Eritrean army will fight back. For example, now if the TDF is trying to march all the way to the Sudan's border, the Eritreans will try to stop them, because they know that once they reach the Sudan's border, the war is lost. If that is the case, they have to. Eritrea will succumb in this war only if it's made to pay for it. Up to now, most of the sacrifices has been done through the Amharas and the Ethiopians. Now, the fear of Eritrea is that this time around, it cannot escape it. It will have to fight on. So that is probably one of the main things that we'll have to see in the next weeks or so. But anyway, as Faisal has said, the TDF, especially the TPLF, the TPLF leadership, has always been prisoner of the laws that they have in their heads. For example, the idea that after withdrawing all the way back from Addis Ababa because of some kind of pressure from the West, that somehow the West will do the right thing, at least on the humanitarian front. I believe the TPLF leadership have to some extent believed this to happen. It didn't happen, and it is not going to happen, as Faisal has stressed. Even now, they have to be careful not to give a long time in between, because Ethiopia is using this time in between for reorganizing its army for a final assault. So Ethiopia shouldn't be given that chance. The TPLF has to do whatever it has to do to get out of this encirclement. That's what I believe.
Thank you. I think Debrecen, this is not his first time to write on Africa Report. On October 21st, he wrote again, what many could call as naive expectation from the West. I think that's what you all are agreeing in terms of what to expect from the West versus what TDF can do.
There's one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there is one thing that I forgot on, the African Confidential. It has come out with an article, I think it was yesterday, and it mentions, what the Abiy did. Let me read a brief one. Worried about the vulnerability of the Humera last month, Abiy asked the EDF, the Eritrean Defense Forces, to secure the road, said an insider in Addis Ababa. Now that the EDF has stationed 2 mechanized and 3 infantry divisions, well over 30,000 soldiers on the Humera border. This is recently. So Abiy, if Abiy is sincere, he should have done the opposite. As I said last time, what's critical is West Tigray, but he is running. He is doing all that he can do. He knew that on his own he can't stop the TDF. marching towards the Sudanese border. And so right now, he has secured the help from Eritrea in order to prevent that. So we could understand, forget about the peace process. He's preparing for the final assault.
Good point. Professor Skel, maybe you can add to what has been said, but with that as well, it would be great if you can give us your final word for today.
From what I kind of agree with what both Joseph and Faisal said. Dr. Debrezion did not spell out what to do. He didn't. I don't think he meant to do that. But one thing that I know about the Tigrayans is that when it comes to Eritrea, I don't think anybody knows the Eritrean leader better than the Tigrayan leadership, including Arkan and others. They know how his mind works. They know how he behaves. With regard to the Ethiopian Prime Minister, they know him very well. They've worked with him as his commander, and they've worked with him in the party, so they know how he behaves as well. I personally don't think that they were begging the West to intervene, because if you really look the structure of the writing, that they make a case. He makes a case, that President Debrezion makes a case that the reason that there is no peace in Ethiopia, or peace initiative that had worked in the Tigray conflict or in the civil war in Ethiopia, the reason that it works, and that's because of Eritrea. That is what Joseph mentioned, that it goes through Asmara. Keep in mind, the architect of the war, the one that put the war plan together, is Asmara. The commanders were the Eritrean commanders. The security personnel in Addis or in the military security intelligence were Eritreans. They know all of that. And I know the Tigrayan leadership knows exactly that the Americans or the West do not respond to any entreaties from an African leader except when they are strong. They know that. They know very well. So this is making a case. So if the shortest, and I don't want to say this already, the shortest route to achieving peace, and that's in the title, is Asmara, I'm sure they're making a case. They're making a case that if you want peace in the Horn of Africa, if there is going to be peace in the Horn of Africa, Isaias must go. Who's going to do that? I don't think it's lost on the Tigrayan leadership that the West is not going to bomb him. It's not lost on them that if the West is not going to impose those kind of sanctions on Eritrea. I don't think they believe that the Chinese are going to do that either. It's going to fall on the Tigrayans for their own survival, for their people's security, that the main impediment to peace in the Horn of Africa is Isaias Afwerki. As long as he is there, the man in Arad Kilo and Addis Ababa will not be able to make peace. He will not be able to, because Isaias will veto it. That's it. So if there is anybody to do anything about Isaias Afwerki, it's going to fall the Tigrayans themselves. So to me, it seems that this is a case to be made to the international community, an argument that should be made before any action. I don't think, and they have already indicated this, the military generals and the political leadership in the United States, they're not going to sit on their hands and see these enemies come out and annihilate the people of Tigray. They're not going to do that. But that will unfold, we will see. I'm sure they're aware of all of that. But my final word is that we are at a critical moment here in Ethiopia. The war-making capacity of the Ethiopian regime has been completely diminished. There is also political fragmentation within the ruling party with regard to the continuation of the war in Ethiopia. After a war, there is always political repercussions in the capital. That is going to will happen in any case. So how the Ethiopians will react to that? Earlier, Faisal mentioned that he's reaching out to other allies in the Horn region. I think the Ethiopian regime is destabilized beyond repair, but they're training upwards of 100,000 personnel in the military training camps. They all want one more war, but it's a foregone conclusion that this is not a war that could be won. So that the descent into chaos and abyss in Ethiopia will continue.
Great, thank you. Faisal, final word?
Yeah, I think the last issue that Scale touched is very well taken, that Abiy, knowing that Farmacho days are numbered, he wants to distance himself from him, and he may be seeking other potential alliances post Farmacho, and that may bode well for the region. I think in terms of the US diplomatic lack of capability, in my opinion, it's expressed initially by Jeff Feltman, who was the envoy, who had no background in Africa, completely new to African diplomacy. And that showed me that despite the hardship that we have in the region, America was not paying as much attention as we would have liked. The two envoys that went, Ambassador Strafford and Fair, both of them also are less, not heavy on African diplomacy. One of them may have some, but not. This is not the type of people that you would assign to the situation that we are talking about in terms of Ethiopia's challenges as we try to move away from the conflict. And then I think Abiy that try alliance, or if you will, that route between Asmara, Bahir Dar, and Addis Ababa may be showing some cracks. If you look at the ethno-nationalist Amara elites, some of them are attacking Abiy for whatever reason, because they wanted to go with him certain point and continue the war in Tigray. That's not happening. He's probably at least in the face. So that conflict is putting Abiy in the bind. On the one hand, he is an ally of Eritrea. On the other hand, Eritrea at any day can be his enemy by allying itself with Amara ethno-nationalists and even think of a certain coup. So Abiy probably is not sleeping at night the way a normal person would be sleeping because of the situation that he faces. I think one thing is the war, which we have really exhausted, and that's more of a military analysis, and I will go short on that one. I think what we like to probably see from the point of view of seeking change to the status quo is to pivot the TDF-OLA alliance, not in terms of just a strategic alliance that they have now, but to find a way to see if there is the possibility that the two armies could work together, even to the point where some TDF forces can come to all our regions so that they can carry common missions. Addis Ababa is not that far from the forces of OLA. I think an additional power coming from TDF, while they are also containing the Western Tigray, I think that could change the game. And I would really like the two sides, OLA and TDF, to consider some proposal in those lines, which could even entice later on other groups such as OLF, Sidama, and I think it's about time to make this Ethiopian situation more than the military thing that it is today, and also bring the political military alliance of the two main players, i.e. TDF and OLA, to combine their efforts and carry missions together. That's the only way we can have a second quick route to make change. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Yosef, final word?
Okay. I think Faisal, the last point that he made in regard to OLA and TDF alliance is apt, but they know. I mean, the Eritreans know that is their that would be their Achilles heel. The Ethiopians know, the Amhara know. That's why they are putting all their force on Western Tigray, because The only way to go to Wallagga is not through, I mean, for example, through Ethiopia inland. You can't go through Wollo and then because especially after the withdrawal. The shortest way for that would be through Sudan, and you go to Wallagga through Sudan. So they know it, and that's why they are fighting them at that border. For them, it's a do or die for all of them. For Ethiopian federal forces, for Amhara forces, for Eritrean forces, it's a do or die. That corridor. If that corridor is opened, it's over. Anyway, for me, let me just end this session by putting some quixotic idea of mine. Quixotic in a way, you could even take it as a rhetorical one. It's in response to the Pan-Africanist pretensions of Ethiopia. That is my proposal. I think the AU itself, the African Union itself, it should be permanently moved to another African state that fulfills certain conditions, all of which Ethiopia fails to fulfill. The first it should be moved to a nation which is not a mega state. For example, like Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, potentially, and of course Ethiopia. Because the weakness of the AU is that because they tend to dominate it. Whichever strong nation tends to dominate it, and the only way it could escape this domination is if the AU is put in some smaller nation. Even a medium nation like Ghana would do, but I prefer a smaller nation like Botswana, for example, 2.55 million people. Then that nation also should have a true democratic credentials, preferably for a long time. Again, Ghana and Botswana come in mind. Ghana, also for Ghana, there was a lot of interruptions. Now it has one of the most robust, you could call, democracy in Africa. And Botswana had a track of democratic record since its independence for more than half a century. The third one would be it should have the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Ethiopia, it doesn't have the slightest bit of Pan-Africanism in its DNA. I'm sorry to say this, but the Africans don't know Ethiopia. Ethiopia there is no Pan-Africanism in Ethiopia among the elite, among any structure in the nation. Again, Ghana would come out the first as a nation, as a center of Pan-Africanism. Botswana is okay, but not as robust as Ghana. The last one, it should have a fairly good standard of living, so that it couldn't be bribed, into doing someone else bidding, and at the same time, a fair distribution of wealth in that country. Again, Ghana is okay, but Botswana is probably the ideal state. It has the highest standard of living among Black Africa. So in a way, what I am saying is that in all of these four conditions Ethiopia fails to fulfill, the least in Pan-Africanist spirit and non-democratic, huge country, and it has among the lowest standard of living in Africa. So that's my quixotic proposal. With that, I will end this my session.
Great. Thank you so much, Yosef, Faisal, and Professor Rizkel. I just want to notify, as you see on the screen, starting next week, each panel will be coming 1 hour earlier than usual. So we'll see you on 8 p.m. at 8 p.m. EST. That will be 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And for today, as always, greatly appreciate your insightful input. Bye from here, and I will see you next week.
Thank you.
We have been live with the Edge Panel, the weekly program from UMD Media. Again, next week, starting next week. Every Friday, we'll be back 1 hour earlier. That would be 8 p.m. Eastern Time or 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The H panel ends here. I'll see you before the H panel with other shows. Bye from here.